Our next speaker is Sister Helen Prejean. If you haven't heard her speak, you are in for a great treat. She has really brought the issue of death penalty into the conversation in this country. She's a nun from the Sisters of St. Joseph of Madé? No, just St. Joseph. And in 1982, she began corresponding with Patrick Sonnier on death row, which ultimately brought her into fighting against the death penalty, where she wrote Dead Man Walking, which is now a book, a movie, a play, and an opera. She has a new book coming out called River of Fire, which I implore you all to buy several copies. And it's very exciting to have Sister Helen come all the way from New Orleans to speak to us, so let's give her a big round of applause.
I'm happy to be here. I'm glad to be in a room of woke people. You suffer more, but you're woke. And hearts on fire for justice. I'm a Catholic nun, taught 7th and 8th grade boys and girls. But to teach 8th grade boys grammar, spelling, I don't know what's worse or what's harder. 8th grade boys, teach them grammar, work on death row. Close. It's close, okay? But I want to take you into my story. What we do when we gather in community like this. We all come with our wounds, maybe a few successes. I just want to tell you outright that you're my heroes. Anybody who's a criminal defense lawyer in one of our deep South states, where racism and poverty has so much to do with how justice prevails or doesn't, is my hero. And thank you. It's an honor for me to be with you. Now let me tell you my story. My book is called River of Fire, and it's the story, the spiritual journey that led me to death row. So I started out like in a double cocoon. First I was a nun, and my spirituality was such, I'm a pious nun, a prayerful nun. I mean, nuns pray, right? And I would pray to God to solve the big problems of the world. But I never saw myself as getting involved in politics. Politics. I was like above politics. You can't get in that political mess. And I was just with Jim Wallace, who began so much about connecting faith and politics. And he said when he was 16, growing up in an evangelical church, and he got a job working alongside Butch, an African-American boy, just like him. And he would hear Butch telling the stories of like how his mama had taught him, if you get lost, son, and you see a policeman, you run and you hide. And Jim had always said, son, if you lost, go to a policeman. A policeman's your friend. And that's when he first began to realize that he and Butch lived in the same city but in different countries. And my waking up was waking up from a life of privilege. The double cocoon was first a spirituality that kept trying to aim heavenward and wasn't looking around on the ground at the suffering people, like Jesus had said to do when I was hungry, when I was in prison. Grounded in the suffering people. And the other thing was white privilege and class. I mean, I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, during the days of Jim Crow. Ellen worked in the house with Mama. Jesse worked in the yard. Never even knew their last names. Never questioned what it meant for them when they went on a trip to have to literally use the green book of where they could stay with people because they couldn't go to a motel, because they couldn't go in a restaurant, because they couldn't use the bathroom that white people never questioned it. And that's what culture does. Culture gives us eyes to see things a certain way, to hear things a certain way. And Mom and Daddy were sweet and good. Like Daddy really helped Ellen and Jesse buy property, get a house, helped Jesse get a good job at the refinery, but never questioned the system. And even like in Sacred Heart Church, black people had to sit apart from white people. And black kids made their first Holy Communion, which is supposed to be the great symbol of how we're one body in Christ. Couldn't make it with the white kids. Never questioned. And so my book, River of Fire, the last page of it opens with the book, Dead Man Walking, and how I woke up. And it was the waking up to justice that led me then to live in the St. Thomas housing projects, and African American people became my teachers. One more little white lady waking up late. We're going to teach you about racism, institutional racism. I didn't know there was something called institutional racism. I thought, well, you're prejudiced, so you're not. White people can be prejudiced, black people can be prejudiced, everybody can be prejudiced. I didn't know about racism, institutional racism, like language. Look it up in the dictionary. White, always pure, good, lily white. Black, blackball, blacklist, black, dark, bad. Language, institutional racism. And then, of course, when I do get involved in the death penalty and I do get involved in criminal justice, of the racism that's in the system, over 90% of judges are white. Most people on the higher courts are white. Most DAs are white. And you know what I found? Because I try to have a compassionate view of everybody. Sometimes I think it's just not that people try to be racist, but when a white person's killed, there's just an easier identity when it's somebody like us. And then once I start learning about the death penalty, and it's overwhelmingly 8 in every 10 people you find on death rows across this country are there because they kill white people. And what happens when a person of color is killed, especially if a person of color is killed by another person of color. I mean, they found on a policeman's notebook in New Orleans, N-O-N. Another one of these N-O-Ns. Nigger on nigger. Doesn't matter. Because if your life doesn't have value, your death doesn't have value. You're not outraged over the death of people. When I moved into the St. Thomas Housing Project, and everywhere I'm looking, I'm learning, and I remember writing. I put it in Dead Man Walking. It was like being in another country. All the rules were different. Suddenly I was in this other thing where the way the police treated you was different. What happened when you went to school was different. I happened to go to a really good high school taught by Sisters of St. Joseph. It's why I joined them. I wanted to be a teacher. They were such great educators, combining faith, humor, and really challenged us to think as young women in an all-girls school. And here these kids are coming in, and like Miss Ruby coming into the Adult Learning Center. She's 75. She wants to learn to read that Bible before she dies because she wants to find out about that man Moses and how he could go up on the mountain and talk to God. When he would come down, he'd be so shining. He had to put a veil in front of his face. Well, she wanted to know about Moses. So, boy, we sit there, Miss Ruby. She'd say, boy, we do this stuff, and it's hard to put it into your 75-year-old mind, all the new vocabulary words she'd never read or heard before. And she said, that doesn't plumb slip through my rememberer. Well, as I get a little older myself, I know about that slippage and the rememberer thing. But there's Miss Ruby, because she was in the field. She was working when she was a kid. I didn't have any experience like that. My daddy was a lawyer. We went to find schools. And then when I joined the nuns, here's the great thing about the sisterhood, is you're educated. And you know that you're going to be given in the sisterhood support. So when I woke up to the death penalty, the sisterhood supported me to work in Louisiana, to work full time, to start organizing and being for the death penalty. When Dead Man Walking came out in 1993, okay, y'all want to talk about miracles? 93. The average support for the death penalty across the United States was at 80%. I mean, what chance does this book have by a nun about the death penalty, spiritual advisor, one of those murderers on death row? Yeah, we get it. She believes in Jesus. Yeah, forgive, yeah. She ain't gonna be able to really face what happened. And if I hadn't had this great editor at Random House, Jason Epstein, to our good Jewish friends, I've already met one sitting in this room with my good Jewish editors at Random House, this Catholic book, Nun's book, would never have even made a blip on the screen because he helped me shape the story. And one time when I was up at the law school at Notre Dame, we had a little luncheon, and one of them said, the one who tells the whole story wins the case. And now we know the work of the mitigation people is every bit as important as the one who's going to stand up at the trial to tell the whole story. So when he got the first draft of Dead Man Walking, he said, I want to just see, because I'd never written a book before, right? And so he looks at it, calls me up to New York, sit down, this is what any writer hopes for, to sit down with your editor, a hands-on thing, to go through the draft of your work. So you're going to shape that story and shape those words so that you can pull people in. Because most people start out thinking, well, of course, it's only going to be for the worst of the worst. And then these cases come up on the news. God, look what happened. That woman and her children, look at that, carjacking. And then they're found dead in the woods. And starts with this outrage, which then just translates immediately to, well, of course they deserve to die for what they did. And that's where you come in. And criminal defense lawyers, I mean, you get a program like they do. You can identify with your client. You are defending that scum. Do you know what that scum did? I mean, some cocktail parties you don't want to go to, and you know that. You know how to pick your cocktail parties and who you're going to be with. The one who tells the whole story wins the case. And I'm going to learn all these things. I don't know any of this. But like Jeremy Gross's story in my book, Death of Innocence, I talk about two people that I accompanied to execution that were innocent. Denny LaBeouf, one of the really great criminal defense attorneys, human rights lawyers that has taught me, still teaches me. She defends people in Guantanamo. Her clients are those, many of whom have not even had a charge made against them. And her client was waterboarded 184 times, and the so-called military court will not even let torture be mentioned in the courtroom. So, boy, you go into law and you just go, well, here's the law. We're going to defend the law. And then you're up against it. And Denny told me one time, it's Denise LaBeouf, we call her Denny, the most vulnerable person walking into a courtroom is an innocent person. Because they know they're innocent, and they say, well, look, as soon as they hear my story and as soon as they hear my alibi, they're going to get it. They never dream that the prosecutor's going to be blocking their narrative, going to have an alternative narrative out there. And you're going to have competing narratives. And then suddenly all those eyewitnesses, he thought for sure we're going to get there to testify for him or for her, they don't show up for some reason. None of them show up. And then at the last minute, like happened with Joseph Odell, he's the second story in Death of Innocence. A jailhouse snitch appears suddenly. Said, yeah, he confessed to me in the cell. He didn't have any defense. It was a total surprise. They weren't told that. The tricks that the prosecutors use. And what's happening to the prosecutors? The prosecutor's supposed to be seeking justice. That's their mission, to seek justice. But they get a bent. They put the spotlight on somebody. The politics gets mixed up with it. I mean, they have shown that in election years, the number of death penalties sought goes up. What's happening to the prosecutors? And of the 165 wrongfully convicted people now in this country, over 90% of the cases were because of prosecutorial misconduct. Prosecutors have the evidence. For John Thompson, Harry Connick Sr. had the ski mask with the blood on it, knew that the blood and the DNA on it did not match that of John Thompson, blocked it. And even when they proved in the DNA test that John Thompson had not worn the mask of the person that killed the person, kept him on death row for 3 more years because he didn't want to be found in the wrong. He kept protesting his innocence, that he had done nothing wrong. And you're up against this system. And that's why I say you're my hero, because you're up against the kind of institutional racism and injustice against poor people I mean, the theory is the lady with the blindfold holding the scales of justice says you're going to get an equal shot. And you know what happens. And over 95%, as you know, of the criminal cases, it's plea bargaining in the basement. Well, what if they don't have a lawyer like you? And what if the defendant says, but I'm innocent? How many of them are then sent, well, look, we don't want to roll the dice here. I'm going to get the best deal I can for you. And then they go to prison. I didn't know the suffering that goes on in prison. What did I know about prisons? So all about the waking up. I call it River of Fire, and the fire is really why we're here today. And I'm here to blow on the coals of your soul, and we do that with each other. Blow on the soul, the coal of our souls, to get that spark, to keep that fire going, keeping the courage going, keeping not getting discouraged and overwhelmed because you're up against the system. You know the most admired male protagonist in American literature is Atticus Finch, who took it on. Wasn't perfect now that we look at it critically. Here we go, white savior trying to save a little black boy, right? Anyway, he took it on, and you take it on. So let me talk about catching on fire and waking up. Of course, the big fire, and it starts, the preface in River of Fire, which comes out August 13th, coming to a bookstore near you, is watching Pat Saunier be electrocuted to death in Louisiana. And it goes like this. They killed a man with fire one night. They strapped him in a wooden chair and pumped electricity through his body until he was dead. His killing was a legal act because he had killed. No religious leaders protested the killing that night. But I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. And what I saw set my soul on fire, a fire that burns at me still. And now here's an account of how I came to be in the killing chamber that night and the spiritual currents that drew me there. And the opening epigraph in River of Fire is a quote from a mystic Franciscan, Saint Bonaventure of the 14th century. Don't ask for understanding. Ask for the fire. Ask for the passion. Ask for soul-sized work, where it means you're going to have a lot of defeats, but it's soul-sized work. Annie Dillard has a great little riff she does in a book about our itsy-bitsy lives, that with our itsy-bitsy friends and having our itsy-bitsy lunches, having our itsy-bitsy conversations. And here we are raising tomatoes in our garden when we ought to be raising Cain or Lazarus. Soul-sized work that's going to take everything you've got. That's why I want to talk to you. And that's why I flew in from Washington, D.C., and I'm going to fly out to Seattle because I wanted to be with you. And so let me tell you some stories about the waking up, a little bit about the... When I did wake up to get it, see, we got to get religion right. God, religion is being used in such a terrible way. You know, Martin Luther King wrote this book called Where Do We Go From Here? Community or Chaos? And when he talked about slavery, he talked about the three pillars that held slavery up. One was religion, just fastly quoting the Bible. This epistle from St. Paul, slaves obey your master. That line from St. Paul was used. And on the way to Angola prison, there's still the red brick ruins of a white church where the white plantation owners would go to church on Sunday and they'd hear those words, but now be kind to your slaves, but never question that people could be your property. So first thing Martin Luther King said that upheld slavery was religion. And of course, in the South, we deal with this. We got churches on almost every corner. I mean, religion comes up among our jurors, among people. Well, the Bible says, and it's the easiest thing in the world to proof text the Bible. I mean, people are so biblically illiterate in this country, 13%, and I'm not kidding you on this statistic, you can write it down, 13% identified Joan of Arc as Noah's wife. I mean, now that's pitiful. Ark and ark, right? Proof texting. Pull out a quote. Justice Scalia at a conference in Chicago quoted Romans 13, basically, which says, obey civil authority because that's the voice of God. And you know who else just quoted Romans 13? Jeff Sessions. To uphold the separation of children from their parents at the border. Because these people are breaking the law. And those of us who are the authorities and do the law have God behind us, wanting to quote the ultimate authority to legitimize and even to sanctify actions so that they cannot be critiqued. Religion. So Martin Luther King said, religion upheld slavery. Science. Well, look, you know, clearly you can see that black people are dumber than white people. I mean, look at them, listen to them. They don't talk right. They can't pass 7th grade. Scientifically, we show, I mean, they had this whole thing of measuring brain size and all. Clearly, you can see that black people are inferior to white people. And boy, you put that white supremacy on it. Let me tell you an interesting story here. Just a couple of weekends ago, I was at Yale at the commencement. Because I move around, see. I can be at Yale at a commencement, then I'm going to be on death row. It's good to have a wide spread. So you know what I mean? And I was sitting next to the president of Harvard. So anyway, we waiting, you know, as the graduates are coming in, and, you know. So he's saying, sister, he said, you know, I was asked twice to be the president of Harvard, and I turned it down. I mean, he knew what was involved. He had been a president of the university. I mean, Harvard, I mean, the politics, the money. You got to really want that job. You got to have your heart in the right place. I turned it down twice. And then he said Charlottesville happened. And I heard Trump say, well, there's good on both sides. And he said, I remembered my mother. His mother was the only one in her family to get out alive of a Nazi concentration camp. Came to the United States, the only one who lived. Met her father, his father married his father. And would say to him, son, don't think it can't happen here, what happened in Germany. And he picked up the phone and he said, I'll accept the presidency at Harvard. He knew he could be in a position to make a difference. It is the education of white Americans that is our main task. That's what I've found, is that if we can be educated about how racism works, and we can be awakened to our own privilege. I mean, people may not like you when you walk in the room for a lot of reasons, but one thing that as white people we never have to deal with is that people are not going to look at us funny because of the color of our skin. They never have to deal with that. And we concentrate on the other struggles, but never that. So Martin Luther King said, first religion, then this thing of science, supposedly, that upholds it. But the big thing that upheld it, of course, was economics. And you want to read an interesting book? I'll find interesting books in airports. Sapiens. It's by this guy Harari. Sapiens, as in Homo sapiens, like us. Sapiens and the whole story of the human race. And it's written in such an engaging way, you're fascinated. But he just went through the whole thing of all the millions of African slaves that we shipped to the United States. And why African slaves? It was shorter than going to Indonesia, and there was already a slavery system in Africa. And then Africans had a more natural immunity to malaria. And to the diseases and yellow fever that would kill white people in droves. So when you're going to be on a southern plantation work and you want people with a natural immunity. all the reasons in history that go into things that set them up. And then when we arrive on the scene, we just accept it as the way it is. Economics, of course, was always underneath slavery. You needed people to work the fields. I mean, when I met people at St. Thomas like Mildred, she said, man, she loved it when it rained when she was a kid. She didn't have to work in the fields. And she said the books we got were always the beat-up, battered books that the white kids had had. They got them first. But man, when it rained, I knew I could go to school. And here she is sitting in the Adult Learning Center. I mean, the legacy. And you want to talk about the economics as a part of the racism in the criminal justice system. After Reconstruction, where did and after, the emancipation, freedom for black people, the liberation of the slaves, where did the plantation owners go to get their workers? So you begin, the great books written about this now, Slavery by Any Other Name, a lot of good books on it. So what did they do? You set up these penal laws and systems in the Deep South, like loitering. So a black person would be found loitering, and loitering, I mean, that was a catch-all thing. So, hey, man, you're loitering, you're put in jail. You're put in jail for like 5 months. So you've served your time, you're ready to get out, and then you're presented with a bill for what you owe for your lodging and for your meals. Well, then you're going to get to work that off. They found a mass grave outside of Birmingham, near where a mine was, where people were sent from the jail to work off their time of what they owed, and they never got out alive. And the mass grave was all those people sent straight from the jail to the mines to work, all unseen. I didn't know anything about all this. When you grow up with the people around you. We're like little fish and swimming in a little school of fish with folks like us. And then things can happen then that wake us up. So for me, it was the waking up that the gospel of Jesus was not about being a polite Christian who went to church and was kind to people, but got involved in justice. And I tell that story and how I woke up. And then 1 year later, after the awakening, I was 40-something years old when I woke up. When I talk to these young people in the university, I say, any time's a good time to wake up. You wake up, you catch on fire, you begin to do work. But if you didn't have the awakening, you could never do it. That's why I said one of the best things, I know I'm coming to you, you woke. You really woke. Because, boy, you're working in a system where so much is against you. First hero I want to hold up that I met. So, okay, I'm in the St. Thomas Housing Projects, glad to be awake, doing what I can to be of service. Black people had been my servant all the time growing up. About time now, I'm working in the Adult Learning Center, working to help people get jobs. And one day, in the last page of this book, first page of Dead Man Walking, Chava Colin from the Louisiana Coalition on jails and prisons walks up to me and said, hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal of somebody on death row? It was 1982. We hadn't had an execution in Louisiana in over 20 years. Nobody had. It was an unofficial moratorium. It started in the 60s. Just started putting the death penalty down. Our country was going through so much questioning the Vietnam War, authority, student rights. People were questioning things. I love the 60s because the nuns woke up too. We needed to wake up. We're in a Catholic church where nuns, this very day, women cannot stand at the lectern at Mass and read the gospel. Only males can read the gospel. Sexism in the Catholic Church and institutions, because patriarchy is so strong in every system, religion not excluded. So the waking up, and he goes, hey, you want to be a pen pal of somebody on death row? When I'm talking to young people, I say, you got to watch. Jesus is sneaky. I have 2 T-shirts now from these different schools I talk to. They send me a sneaky Jesus. Watch out, sneaky Jesus. It can also be a sneaky criminal defense attorney, he says, hey, Bob, come over here. Let me tell you about something. Man, you want to do real work. Come on, look. And sucks you into it. Hey, you want to go to this conference? Hey, you want to do this? And you end up being a criminal defense attorney, and you in over your head, and you lose in most of your cases. And you go, that sneaky guy, that sneaky person brought me in there. But it's like your boat gets caught in a current. You're in it. And then you begin to learn. You begin to learn the law. You begin to learn it. So anyway, I thought I was only going to be writing letters. And I was an English major. So I thought I could write some nice letters, maybe a little poem or two. I never dreamed this person's going to be executed, and I'm going to be witnessing him being electrocuted to death. Are you kidding me? I thought I was just going to be writing letters. And I wrote, and he wrote back. And you know the first time you go and see your client, oh my God, being a lawyer is so important in this country. I mean, you know how doctors save lives? I mean, how surgeons save lives, how Doctors Without Borders save lives, lawyers save lives. And this is the first time I was going to learn the difference a lawyer makes in a case. I didn't know how it worked. I write the man, he writes back. He had no one to visit him. I go visit him. And I got to confess that when I first went to death row in Louisiana, I mean, it's so formidable. I mean, the visiting sign says, coming in, you subject yourself to this body search, dog sniffing. I mean, man, I was scared to walk into the place. And then all these guards bring you clang, clang. There's no music like elevator music or nothing. It's all just cement floor and walls, and sounds reverberate, and metal clanks, which Tim Robbins wanted to get into the movie. Goes, there's a lot of harsh sounds going to be in this movie of Dead Man Walking. And then they locked me in a room, said, well, go get your man. And I started being nervous about him because, I was thinking, well, anybody can write nice letters. I really didn't even know his crime. And I'm going to be face to face with somebody who murdered somebody. Like, what's he going to be like? Is his face going to be different? If you murder somebody, you look different, right? I mean, you mean, right? In fact, do you know that the Supreme Court has set up a system saying that we're only going to reserve the death penalty for the worst of the worst? We don't know what that means. Worst of the worst? How do we know? Worst of the worst means in their character, they're unredeemable. These people are evil. That's why we can't even put them in prison, because they'll kill other inmates, they'll kill the guards, make the people afraid. These people are evil. Worst of the worst. And I meet him, and we had this heavy metal grate between us, which I was glad for, because I was protected. And I looked through that grate into the eyes of that man. I said, oh my God, he's a human being. Could see the humanness in his face. And then as I got to know him, and that was the beginning then of my journey. And I absolutely knew when I left him that day, I said, I put my hand as close as I could to touching him. The grate, our fingertips could barely touch in the little space there. And I said, I'll be back, Pat. And I didn't know. Didn't know about the law. Tim Robbins, all while he was doing the movie, kept saying the nun was in over her head. Well, yeah, I knew nothing about the law. I knew this, that I had met him, and that the most important thing was going to be faithful. To be faithful. And I said, I'll be back. And in between, I wrote letters. And I also got other people to write to him. Because you get 1,000 signals a day, not just in death row, but so many ways in prison, that you are disposable human waste. And I heard that term from Millard Farmer, who, as Pat's case cracked along in the justice system, and I was present at the Fifth Circuit when I heard his lawyer try to argue for him before the Fifth Circuit. Not knowing anything about the appeals process, not knowing anything about procedural bars and how that works. But that lawyer was sweating so bad, and even a member of the Fifth Circuit said, well, Mr. So-and-so, would have been helpful if you... And I went, ooh, I knew this, that I'd heard that Fifth Circuit was really tough, And if even they are helping a lawyer trying to formulate what he's trying to say. So I had heard about this man, Millard Farmer, in Atlanta. I don't know if any of y'all ever had any encounters with Millard Farmer, but he is a character. And so people said, well, you know, he's a bit eccentric, you know, but boy, he really cares about clients. If you could get him to take this man's case, maybe he could help. So, man, I'm on the phone. I had the number. And I hit the poor man like a fire hose. I did. I said, Mr. Farmer, my name's Sister Helen. I'm the spiritual advisor of this man on death row. I think he's in trouble. His name is Pat Sonier. He was before the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit judges were like helping a lawyer. And I think he's in deep trouble, and I heard about you. I heard you take these cases. And please, Mr. Farmer, would you please take the man's case? And I hear on the other end this gravelly voice, Georgia accent, thick as molasses. I'm going to help you. Oh, man, I'm going to help me. Man, he's going to help me. And then right away he said, send me the transcripts. So I was supposed to go to lunch with Sister Margaret that day. We ain't going to lunch. We getting these papers they call the transcripts. We get them in a big fat envelope and we mail them to this man, Mr. Farmer, in Atlanta. And I learned from him, first of all, dedication. With Joe Nursey, Kim Ellen Trunkle, Team Defense Atlanta, driving all night from Atlanta to come meet me in the car there and driving to Angola. And while we're driving to Angola to meet Pat is where the teaching happens in Dead Man Walking, because he's teaching me, so you can take your reader with you. Because I know I got him through the end of chapter 4 in Dead Man Walking, because that's the execution of Pat Sonier. So, and I had this, as I told you, this great editor who had said, if you don't talk about the crime in the first 10 pages, nobody's going to read your book, because they're going to think that you're so for the human rights of this person, what Jesus said and all, that you're not going to be able to face how terrible the crime is. And if there's anything thrown at criminal defense attorneys, how many times do you know what he did? And then you're dealing with your clients, with people with varying degrees of education, social sensibilities not very developed. Most of them were abused themselves when they were growing up, like the client who said, look, I raped her, but I did not aggravate her. I mean, I don't know why they call it. I mean, you know, you're dealing with different sensibilities of people. And Millard Farmer begins to teach me. He teaches me how the system works. And here's this man, after driving all night, and we go to see Pat. And I'll never forget this. I put it in detail in Dead Man Walking, because I remember that first visit. He said, now, Pat, here we got a wagon we're going to put up here, and we're going to see how many big rocks we can put in the wagon for your defense. Because he'd already been through the system. He had already had his appeal turned down by the Supreme Court. I mean, he's on the track to be killed in Louisiana. And I mean, we were killing people quick then. 8 people and 8.5 months were executed in Louisiana. And he's going to be the third one executed. It just started coming down. And so he said, we're going to see what rocks we can put in the wagon. Okay. Tell me about your lawyer that you had. He said, well, Mr. Farmer, I never saw the lawyer. I was arraigned and everything, and I didn't have my lawyer there. He said, so I met my lawyer the day before the trial. This is a death penalty case. So no boulder in the wagon on that one. And then he said, confess. Did you confess? Yeah, I confessed many times, he said. But here was the thing. In the crime, let's face the crime. Pat Sonier and his brother Eddie, in cold blood, had killed 2 innocent teenage kids. White kids, of course. And they were found lying down near the cane field, and they had both been shot in the back of the head, close range, 3 times. Bang, 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 bang. And Loretta, the young woman, had been raped. That's the crime. And the brothers, not knowing anything about defense or what's the best strategy Said, well, look, let's both say we did it. And then they'll never know who did it. Great strategy, huh? I mean, they didn't have help. They didn't have lawyers. And the complexity of this story, and you know how complex it can get, who did what to whom, and how do you prove it in court? How many boulders can you get in a wagon? Eddie was the one who killed the kids that night, and he got 2 life sentences. And the day when Pat was executed, there was on the front page of the Times-Picayune, brother to governor, please, you're killing the wrong man, but it was all too late. Because Eddie had been given a life sentence. The court believed, because he was a younger brother, they believed all this, and he had 2 life sentences. And I accompanied Eddie until he died a natural death 4 years ago from a heart attack, working at the incinerator in Angola. But that man had to bear. They did let him come to the wake after Pat had been executed, and he walks up to the coffin surrounded by these guards and looked down at his brother and said, now 3 people are dead because of me. But how do you get the story out? How do you get the truth out? You know what it's like. And Eddie had to deal with that all of his life, of what he had done. They've done studies that a lot of violence happens because people feel shame. Eddie, the big thing in his life, because they were so poor, don't you ever call me white trash. Don't you ever look down on me because I'm poor. And 6 weeks before the murder of these 2 kids happened, he had gotten a girl pregnant, and he was going to go to the family, he was going to do it right, he was going to ask for her hand in marriage like a true Southern gentleman, and is met by the father of the girl on the front porch with a shotgun. You white trash person, don't you even step on my property. There's no way I'm going to let you marry my daughter. And he had gone off the rails. He had cut the telephone wires to the house. He had a sawed-off shotgun, was going to kill them all, and they got him, put him in jail for him to cool off. His mama talked to the sheriff. And he had just been out 6 weeks. He was so volatile. There were flashpoints in him. And I got to witness it one time when he was visiting with his sister, who came to see him once. And she had changed her name from Mary to Marie, and she was like, she's above us. And I saw that fire and that anger well up in him. And you got a gun in your hands, and it happened. Somewhere in the course of the night, and they had been doing these terrible things. It's a power thing. Kidnapping are these young people who would come park in this place, and the brothers would be waiting, and they would have their .22 rifles, and then they'd abduct the kids, and often they would rape the girls. That's a power thing. We'll show you who has power. I mean, when I lived in St. Thomas, and they had these young kids going around with guns. Here's a young black kid who never gets any respect. And he walks in the room with that gun, and everybody is very respectful. Because when you don't have respect, I didn't realize all that respect means to people. And shame is the trigger often for volatility. There's a psychologist that worked and did studies in prison, and here was a guy who had beaten the hell out of somebody to a pulp. And he goes, well, man, what happened? He dissed me, man. He bumped into me on purpose. You beat him up because he bumped into you. The thing of respect, when you don't get respect, that anger that wells up, and violence, it's what you know. So here's Millard Foreman talking to Pat. Trying to put rocks in the wagon. Confession, it took them over a month to find the 2 brothers who had killed these 2 innocent kids. And they would be around in bars, and they'd hear people talking, man, when they get those 2, they ain't even going to make it to trial, man. When they they didn't know it was 2, whoever murdered these kids. And they were scared to death. And then when they did get arrested, and then Pat said when he was down in that basement with those policemen that came in with their guns strapped in, and he knew he could be pistol whipped to death, their anger. And let's just understand on this side, too, of what policemen do see. And when I hear that policemen are for the death penalty because of the crime scenes, because they're the ones who often see the victims, and then you want justice, I mean, I get it. Compassion means we got to be able to move over to both sides to understand where people are coming from. So imagine when your job is being called to these scenes, and here's a family, or here's a, an old couple strangled to death or killed, or just, I mean, imagine what they have to deal with. So I always treat them with a lot of respect. The guards at Angola too, like I've talked to everybody. How you doing? What you did this past week? I went squirrel hunting. Well, it's good to talk about squirrel hunt. And Millard Farmer would tell me this too. He said, get to know your prosecutor. If you can, go hunting with the prosecutor. Go have a meal with the prosecutor. Get to know them as persons. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? That's what he was always saying. And so by the time we left Pat, there were no rocks in the wagon. He was so afraid of those policemen. He confessed. I think he did like 6 confessions. He couldn't visit with his mama for 6 weeks because they had knocked out his front teeth from beating him. Who knows people are being beaten? I mean, if you're ever in the Chicago area and hang out anywhere around Cook County, what the police were doing to people when they had them in custody, hitting them with telephone books so the bruises didn't come from a blunt object, putting plastic bags over people's faces. All the anger of the police force who have the power is directed at these people. And I begin to learn, and Millard Farmer becomes my teacher. And as it ends up, when Pat's executed, see, everything to me was unfolding like, what? Well, he really is going to be executed? Well, what about what happened? The end of that is his lawyers were so incapable. I learned this. I didn't know this. But at trial, if your lawyer doesn't raise a formal objection about what's going on, it's not going to be in the transcript, and the appeals courts, the state Supreme Court, doesn't have the fodder to look at whether or not you have an appeal because nothing's on the record, no formal opposition. Dobie Williams, first man in death of innocence. Black man with an IQ 65, white woman killed in her bathroom in a little town of Manny, Louisiana. All white jury sat, a number of whom were white women, and Dobie's lawyer didn't say a word. No formal objection, and so no court could pick up. Hey, what about racism in the sitting of the jury? What about racism in the grand jury where you'd never had a black foreman since 1865 or whatever? But none of that counts because that lawyer didn't raise formal objections. And I said to Millard one time, I said, well, why don't the lawyers fight harder? Your Honor, I object. And he said, because of the disrespect given to the lawyers. He said, we've even had, there are people that take these cases in the Deep South where the lawyer's table, the defense lawyer, was behind the prosecution. The prosecution was sitting further up in the court, could have eye contact with the judge. And every time the prosecution raised an objection, sustained, overruled. And you don't get respect. The lawyers don't get respect. And he said it's just because of social pressure on these lawyers. And Millard would talk about team defense taking these cases in these little Georgia and out in the country, all of them because they don't have money, getting one motel room, some of them sleeping on the floor, all of them just one room. And then they rent a car there. The whole town sees these white men coming in to take the case, and they know whose case they're taking. And they come out one morning and they find a bullet hole in the front fender of the car. So they call the police. Our car was shot at last night. Police said, what do you mean? Bullet hole. He said, bullet hole, like right here, that round thing there. And he said the policeman wrote, alleged bullet hole. You don't have the police for you, you don't have the townspeople with you, you're in there, up against great odds. And intimidation. Every time you raise an objection, you're overruled. And you know, and I mean, that's why I love you. It's why I care about you. It's why I want to be here. To just say, look, you are the reason that I know you don't feel like heroes, and you know all the cases you lost, but you're in there where it counts the most. And in terms of integrity of your soul, and I know you're thinking of the cases where you could have worked harder. I know where you were tired. Maybe you just couldn't file one more motion, one more brief. I know you don't do it perfectly. Who does? But you're here. And I'm here. And there's nobody I'd rather be with. So I have all these experiences, like then the man's executed. And do you know that Millard knew that Edwin Edwards, who was the governor of Louisiana at the time, and like the governor of Texas, he was trying to distance himself as governor from these cases. You do not want these cases coming to you at the last minute. And so we're going to find out afterwards how Governor Edwards had given, to the pardon board people that he appointed. All I ask is loyalty. Well, we see that going on in the White House like mad. Just give me your loyalty. And then later I'm going to find out, and it's in the book, Dead Man Walking, Howard Marcellus, African-American man, who was a public education superintendent. And then he's asked to be on this pardon board. Sure, I'll give loyalty to the governor. And there he is on the board, and the case of Timothy Baldwin comes up, where they were beginning to show all the stuff that didn't come up at trial. I mean, all this stuff that they were able to show, that the man was innocent, that the man didn't do the murder. And Howard Marcellus was struck in his conscience. And so they're behind closed doors, and they're voting, and they're at a pardon board. And the bribes were going on. They would have envelopes marked with a special thing on it. This family paid money, so, okay, you want to give a pardon. It was rife with bribery and wrong things going on. But here's this man, Timothy Baldwin, they're doing the vote. It's really, and he knows, excuse me, wow, you feel you've been shot? He really thinks this man's maybe innocent, and he calls up the governor's office, and he's crying. And the lawyer on the other end, who's there to protect the governor, said, Howard, remember, when you got into this, remember what you said, that you'd be loyal to the governor. Well, the governor wants you to be loyal to him. And he knew what that meant. You got to find him guilty, not give him clemency. And Howard Marcellus did that. He caved in, regretted it for the rest of his life. He asked to be at the execution of Timothy Baldwin. And of course, the governor's office, very nervous. What kind of thing might he say? And they sent one of the lawyers from the governor's office to accompany him to that execution, sit by him, be with him when he came out. His wife was waiting for him, and they were driving down that lonely road 66, which dead ends at Angola. And he is crying, and he is saying, honey, why did I ever leave education? And then he had witnessed the execution of a man, and he was part of the system. Then later, I hear, several years afterwards, he was one of the people arrested for taking bribes, and that he was going to go to prison. And I called him up, and I asked if I could talk to him, that I was writing this book, and he said, sure. And Howard Marcellus' story is in there too, and how you get sucked into a system. Just be loyal. Well, he thought he could be fair. He thought he could speak his conscience. But be loyal means you always go along. We haven't had an execution in Louisiana in 17 years. We are shutting down the death penalty in practice first, before we get it off the books. Why haven't we had an execution in 17 years? Why are death sentences getting to be so rare in Texas, in Harris County, that had to put it out 248 death sentences when they were at their height? And the pattern we're beginning to see across the United States, so-called worst of the worst, it's always going to be up to prosecutors, DAs, to have the discretion to go for the death penalty or not. So I was just with Dave Wymore in Colorado, where they have a teaching method of how you prepare for defense called the Colorado method. We were just at a party to celebrate. They have only put 2 people on death row in all the years in Colorado, and it's not like the prosecutors weren't trying hard. And Dave Wymore was the head of the Capitol Defense Team, and he began to notice a pattern that out in the rural places, where the DAs were getting the death penalties, it was easy. So he had the A team, and wherever they heard in the state that there was a prosecutor who was going for the death penalty, the A team would go headed up by himself, and the first thing he'd do is meet with the prosecutor. And he'd say, look, you can have the velvet glove or you can have the iron glove. The velvet glove is you don't try to kill my client. Well, wait a minute, we're not killing anybody carrying out the law. He said, my client's going to be dead at the end of this process. Iron glove means if you go and you try to kill my client, I'm going to fight you every inch of the way. I'm going to file pretrial motions. I'm going to find out when you're lying. We're going to get it out to the media. And they would send the A-team in to all these places, these country places where they'd go for the death penalty. They ended up with 2 people on death row in Colorado. And I don't know how many attempts. And when we look at Louisiana's record, where, of course, it's always poor people, overwhelmingly people who've killed white people in Louisiana, who end up where they go for the death penalty. Out of 185 death sentences that were given, only 2% actually went to execution. And here's the ace in the hole that prosecutors use. We're doing it for the victim's family. You ever been part of a death penalty trial? I have. I've witnessed this. And there's the family, that poor family sitting there, being subjected to hearing the coroner's report and being told, don't show any emotion or they'll declare it a mistrial. And there they are sitting there. And there's that prosecutor saying to the jury, do the right thing for that family. Because they're never going to see their daughter graduate from college. They're never going to see their grandchildren. Their daughter is dead, buried forever. Do justice for this family. Why is it, do you think, that when New Jersey 12 years ago in their legislature did away with the death penalty, 62 murder victims' families testified saying, don't kill for us. The death penalty re-victimizes us. 6 weeks ago, I was given a talk in Cincinnati. We had a time for conversation, questions and stuff afterwards. A woman came up to the mic, said, my sister was murdered. Our family didn't want the death penalty. They went for the death penalty. How can we grieve in privacy and in peace? The media is always at our door. Any change in the status of the crime. What do you think? Our grief is public. Do you really think that you're going to wait 15 years and then a family's going to send a representative to watch as the state imitates the killing, kills the one who killed their loved one, and by a representative of the family witnessing that violence, they're going to be healed? What happens to the average in Louisiana? 15 years of waiting before you get that. Longer in some states. California, with 737 people on death row in California. What's going on there? They've only executed 13 people in all the years of having a death penalty. They spent $300 million on each one of those executions because everybody gets paid in California. You want to be a defense lawyer there because you do get paid, and they got mitigation specialists and everything. 737. What's the reason all those people on death row? Prosecutors knowing full well that their client, that the person they're prosecuting is never going to be prosecuted. What is it? Politics. Politics. It's you got talking points when you're going to run. And then you get into all these micro-cultures. Is anybody surprised that over 70% of the actual executions that have happened in this country have happened in states that formerly practiced slavery? Us, you, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana. Is it a surprise to us? We know. Why haven't we executed anybody in Louisiana in 17 years? They said, well, the drugs. Well, they defeated in the legislature to just plumb try to keep the drugs secret. Texas, you getting drugs because you got all these people in the pipeline who have pretty much exhausted their appeals in the courts, and you're still killing people like mad in this state. And it's got to be hard just to live in such a death state where they're still doing it. But it's being stopped. What I think, my own personal hunch is, why are we not killing people in Louisiana? Well, first of all, they're beginning to see how costly it is. All those 185 death sentences, and yet very few people were actually executed, because most of the cases were overturned for one reason or other. Or they showed the prosecutorial misconduct, or they showed that evidence was hidden. Brady violation. The man I accompany right now on death row, Manuel Ortiz from El Salvador, is going on 27 years on Louisiana's death row, and he is innocent. I have accompanied 7 people. 6 have been executed. Manuel's my 7th, and 3 of the 7 have been innocent. 3. That's how broken it is. Because you're poor, you don't get good defense, the truth doesn't come out at trial. It's supposed to be an adversarial system. You know why I think we're not doing it? Because I think the guards and the wardens don't want to do it anymore. I don't know in Texas when there'll be this surfeit of killing, that you're finally going to have a warden like Rob Andrews in Florida, who said, I went to be warden of that prison as an honorable job, and he ends up at 2 executions. He gives public talks and says, I'm going to be in therapy the rest of my life. I watched and participated as a person was rendered defenseless and killed in front of my eyes, and I participated in the killing. I tell the story of one person in Dead Men Walking, Sergeant Cootie, who called me into his office one day there when I was at the penitentiary. And he said, Sister, I've been through 5 of these. He would have done all right if he had just been the supervisor in death row and supervisor order on the tier, but then they moved him over to the execution squad. And he had gotten to know each of the men on death row. He knew their crimes. He said, some of their crimes just make your blood run cold. But I got to know them. And he recognized, as I did soon after I got to death row there, that people are worth more than one terrible or 2 terrible acts. We're always transcending. We're human beings with more than our actions. He knew. And he said, Sister, 5 of them. And I come home afterwards and I just get in my lazy boy chair and I can't sleep at night, can't eat. My wife knows not to talk to me. And he said, I'm going to have to quit this job. And he's the only man I met in the system who did quit the job, and died not too long afterwards of a heart attack. I think it's because the guards and wardens don't want to do it anymore. The closer you are to it, the more you know about it. And that's what we got to do with the public. I'm glad about the book, Dead Men Walking. I'm glad about the movie. I'm glad about the opera. I'm glad about this new book coming out. And the people, when they wake up, they go, well, I didn't know it was like that. It's not like the people are wedded to the death penalty. It's just they haven't been brought close. And I'll end with this. This is a saying from Latin America. What the eye doesn't see, the heart can't feel. And you, blessed souls, get to defend people that other people just consider disposable human waste. Good for you. God bless you. You stay strong. Stay in your community. Keep your strength going. Keep your souls lit. God bless you. Thank you.